In the 60 seconds before you reach the checkout counter, your cortisol levels skyrocket, matching those of an Olympic athlete right before a race. Your heart races, your palms sweat, you frantically bag your items. If you've ever felt this bizarre checkout panic, you're not crazy. In the past, the supermarket industry discovered something so absurd about human nature and kept this secret hidden for decades. Watch until the end to discover the permanent trick for your psychological system that manually neutralizes your primal fears, giving you absolute control over your emotions in any public space.
You go to the supermarket, you grab your items, you wait in line, and then, at the exact moment you reach the checkout, something changes inside you. Your heart rate goes up, your hands get slightly sweaty, you start mentally calculating how to bag everything faster, and for a few seconds, that completely mundane task, putting groceries into bags, becomes the most important and most threatening thing in your day. Why does that happen? The obvious answer is social pressure, being in a rush, fear of holding up the line. But the real answer? It's one of the most disturbing and liberating discoveries that behavioral neuroscience has ever produced about human behavior, and it has absolutely nothing to do with supermarkets. What I'm going to show you today is that this bagging panic, this small, almost embarrassing thing that most people never admit to, is actually a direct window into the most fundamental mechanism of your social psychology. And in this video, I'm going to reveal the discovery that researchers took decades to publish because it implies something about human nature that is simultaneously devastating and completely liberating. But before that, I need you to see something that will completely change how you read the people around you. Let me ask you a question. Do you know someone in your life who is extremely organized? The person who folds laundry the moment it comes out of the dryer, plans out the whole week on Sunday, never shows up late. Now think, does that person stay calm or get nervous at the checkout? If you answered nervous, you just observed something that overturns one of the most basic assumptions in everyday psychology. And if you answered calm, you probably haven't watched them closely enough, because the data is unequivocal. Highly organized people suffer severe breakdowns at checkout than disorganized people. Not slightly more, much more. Why? I'll explain in 2 minutes, but first, I need you to understand something about what your brain is actually doing in that moment. Picture this scenario. You're on an African savanna 200,000 years ago. You're part of a group of 30 people. Your survival depends entirely on the group's acceptance. In that context, being slow, being inefficient, blocking the group is a real threat to survival. You could be marginalized, cast out, and social exclusion in that context was literally fatal. Now, question, what do you think your brain does when you reach the checkout with 7 people in line behind you?
Now, question, what do you think your brain does when you reach the checkout with 7 people in line behind you? Exactly that. It triggers the same emergency protocol that was developed for that savanna. To your brain, there is no difference between being expelled from the tribe and holding up the line at the grocery store. And the proof is in your hormones. Researchers measured cortisol levels, the stress hormone, in people in the 60 seconds before they reached the checkout. The result was so absurd they had to repeat the experiment 3 times. But before I tell you what they found, I need to show you something even more surprising. Because who do you think suffers the most in this situation? Men or women? Adults or elderly people? Introverts or extroverts? The answer goes against everything you'd intuitively expect, and it reveals something about you specifically, not about people in general. Researchers found that the average cortisol level of a person in the seconds before checkout is equivalent to that of an athlete right before a competition. To be precise, we're not talking about someone with an anxiety disorder. We're talking about the average, about you, about me, about anyone. This means that from a biochemical standpoint, going to the supermarket is, for your nervous system, a high-performance sport. But here's where it gets interesting, because if that's true for everyone, then why do some people seem completely at ease at the checkout, while others nearly fall apart? The answer lies in a phenomenon psychologists call the spotlight effect. And once you understand this mechanism, you'd realize it doesn't only operate in the supermarket. It operates in every work meeting, in every social situation, in every moment you hesitate before speaking. But there's a data point about the spotlight effect that most people have never heard, and when you hear it, it sounds almost insulting in its simplicity. Researchers at Cornell University spent years measuring the gap between how many people think are watching them in social situations versus how many are actually paying attention. The result? You consistently overestimate by 3 to 4 times the number of people who are judging you at any given moment. In other words, if you feel like 5 people are analyzing you at the checkout, in reality, maybe 1 is minimally aware of your existence, and even that attention lasts less than 3 seconds.
So, you're alone in your spotlight, in an empty stadium, worried about an audience that isn't there. That should be comforting, right? But then, why doesn't the information solve the problem? Why do we know this and still keep getting nervous? This is where we reach the part that researchers took the longest to publish. And to understand it, we need to talk about plastic bags. No, I'm not changing the subject. Plastic bags are one of the most disturbing pieces of this puzzle. And what I'm about to tell you about them will make you look differently at every detail of the supermarket. Did you know that the resistance of plastic bags, that difficulty opening them that drives you crazy, was psychologically tested before it was finalized? It's not a production accident, it's design. And the reason they were designed that way will make you question how many of your decisions in that space are actually your own. Let's put it all together. You walk into the supermarket with a brain that was programmed for tribal survival. You go through a systematic process of decision fatigue throughout the store. You arrive at the checkout with your nervous system on high alert because of an evolutionary mechanism that confuses checkout with a real social threat. And then, at the exact moment of your greatest neurological vulnerability, you're surrounded by products surgically positioned to exploit your reduced ability to resist impulse, while you struggle with bags that were deliberately designed to keep you in that space for an extra 18 seconds. This isn't paranoia, it's documented in scientific literature, design patents, and internal neuromarketing reports. But here's the part that struck me most when I read it for the first time. There's a researcher named Laura Carstensen from Stanford University. She spent decades studying an apparently unrelated question. Why do elderly people report greater emotional well-being than young adults despite having worse health, less energy, and less time left to live? And what she found, what became known as the socio-emotional selectivity theory, answers not only that question, but also the central question of this video.
Because Carstensen's data shows that the people with the lowest observable stress at the supermarket checkout, the ones who move their items slowly, chat with the cashier, and don't care about the line behind them, are not the youngest, the most organized, or the extroverted. They're people over 65. And the reason they're free from this panic is not indifference, not naivety, not senility. It's the most important discovery any person can make about themselves, and I'm going to tell you right now. What Carstensen discovered is this. As people age and come to realize that time is finite, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality, a dramatic shift occurs in the brain's emotional value system. The judgment of strangers, which previously occupied a significant portion of cognitive and emotional resources, begins to lose real weight, not pretend weight, real weight. The brain literally recalibrates how much importance it gives to the approval of people it doesn't know. And that completely resolves the bagging panic.
Because bagging panic is, at its core, fear of judgment, fear of being seen as slow, incompetent, inadequate. And when that fear loses the emotional charge that sustains it, when you genuinely don't care about strangers' opinions, not as a posture, but as an internal state, the panic simply has no foundation left to stand on. But here's the part that changes everything. You don't need to be 65 to have that insight. You don't need decades to get there. What elderly people arrive at through time, you can access through understanding. Because the bagging panic isn't real in the way it feels. The threat isn't real. The judgment, which you feel intensely, is being overestimated by a factor of 3 to 4. The audience you're imagining isn't there. The danger your nervous system is signaling doesn't exist in that context.
And when you truly understand that, not just intellectually, but feel it in your biochemistry, something shifts. The next time you're at the checkout, bag in hand, item dropping, the person behind you sighing, you'll remember, this nervousness isn't weakness, it's 200,000 years of evolution responding to a grocery store conveyor belt. It's the most sophisticated survival system ever built by nature, operating with good intentions, but in completely the wrong context. You're not failing, you're being human. And the difference between the person who panics and the person who stays calm isn't character, intelligence, or organization. It's awareness. It's knowing what's happening and being able to choose how to respond. And if the supermarket checkout can teach you that about yourself, imagine what else is waiting to be discovered in the small situations you dismiss as everyday nonsense. The supermarket was never about groceries. It never was. If this video made you see something different in yourself, share it with someone you think needs to hear this. And tell me in the comments what everyday situation triggers a panic that feels completely out of proportion. Because the next video might be exactly about that.